We have co-hosting on this fine day the New York Times best-selling author John Gilstrap.
Good morning.
Jefferson County Prosecuting Attorney Matt Harvey.
Good morning.
And we appreciate you watching on TV 10, our Facebook Live television feed with a live comments section, and also on the old traditional way of doing it, where it all began, AM 740, and then FM 106.5, which was added to the family about a dozen years ago. Gentlemen, welcome back to the second hour of the program. Great to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
Did it stop drizzling outside, Mike Allers Jr.?
Yes, finally. Finally.
That's a good thing.
And finally, there's a guest here, so people can not just hear us talk about stuff.
People loved hearing you guys talk about stuff. They did. I was watching the digit counters. They were ticking up. Everybody loves an opinion. You either love to disagree with it or agree with it.
Well, I really didn't give an opinion. I just talked about stuff.
That's good, too.
Matt always has the hot take, so.
No, I never have a hot take.
Our guest
I
in
throw
this,
softballs and I'm bland.
our guest in, our guest in this segment is Mike Allers Jr. He was formerly a candidate in the 99th for the House of Delegates and currently writes and produces for One America News Network. Mike, good morning. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, good morning. Good to be in the studio.
Yeah, how did you wind up with OAN?
So it's actually, I have a mutual friend with Chanel Rion, and she was like, look, Chanel's about to launch a show. Why don't you give her a call? And we got in touch, got to know each other, and she's fantastic. And we hit it off, and when we launched on One America News for Fine Point, I was selected as the writer and co-producer.
And I think you guys got official White House privileges this year, too, right?
Yes. So really good things happening for One America News and the new media. It's no longer going to be about the legacy media and CNN and NBC. We're going to be moving, whether it's, smaller conservative outlets like ours, the podcast space, radio shows. It's a new day for new media.
Yeah, what do you, when you gather your news and such, what sources do you use to pick up what you're going to talk about?
Sure. So I like a well-balanced diet personally. So, I will look at, the fake news media. I'll look at CNN. I'll look at New York Times, of course. However, when it comes to like Breitbart, Free Beacon is also another good source of information. Daily Signal is also up and coming. Underreported stories go there in the conservative news space, and we definitely keep an eye on those.
What is the definition of conservatism in 2025? Because, and I ask that question, because in a state that is dominated thoroughly by the Republican Party, the previous primaries showed that the word liberal, which used to be reserved for actual liberals, was suddenly applied to what used to be considered very conservative Republicans. And now I'm confused as to what a conservative is anymore, because the definition now seems to be, if you agree with everything I say, you're a conservative. If not, if one of the things I say you don't agree with, you're a liberal.
I completely agree with that, because I personally, when I ran for the House of Delegates, was a victim of that, okay? I'm a conservative in the traditional sense in terms of tradition, family values, things of that nature, self-reliance. However, I have been called a liberal because I was like, hey, maybe we should reform public school. Maybe we should support single mothers. Maybe we should make it easier to raise a family. So it's very interesting to me, and it's frustrating. In West Virginia, we have a supermajority. We're considered this ruby red state, but we actually don't get anything done. And it's at all. And it's been incredibly frustrating kind of watching from those sidelines. Glad I have the platform I do at One America News, but as a West Virginian, it's frustrating when I see these guys say, we're doing so much in Charleston, and we are 50th in everything. We are still poor. We still have the worst education system in the country. And we're passing bills about, let's have a 16-year-old walk around with a gun in the Capitol, that's going to bring food in people's mouths.
Yeah. So where does the Republican Party go from here? Because that's generally considered to be the home of conservatism, but I'm not sure anymore.
It's actually interesting, guys. Vivek Ramaswamy just announced his candidacy for governor in Ohio, and that's the first glimpse of almost like a post-Trump era going forward into the future, where he's saying, personal responsibility, economic growth, but he's also saying importance of family, investing in our children, making sure manufacturing is back in America and these underrepresented communities. That's kind of the first glimpse I've seen in this run for governor of Ohio where, especially in West Virginia, we want this backyard brawl, but Ohio's going to clean their clock if we kind of don't align with some of the stuff that he's talking about. He wants to completely, get rid of like property tax, things like that. Those are exciting reforms that I see because at least Vivek and even J.D. Vance, who's more of a populist, kind of more my speed. I'm conservative populist myself. Those are policy guys. And I think it's important in the conservative movement to have a conversation about policy and not just attitude and day trading ideology.
That's a fair point. Mr. Gilstrap.
You used a word that I hear a lot, and I confess I use periodically, the phrase fake news. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned CNN.
Yeah.
Do you believe that CNN actually lies, or do you think that their word choice and their headline choice is slanted?
And this is my personal opinion. I'm not going to speak for my network, but I do believe, like in my personal opinion, it's word choice and withholding information. I don't know if you guys saw Jake Tapper's coming out with a book about Joe Biden's mental decline. I bet you they knew this 2 years ago, but they're like, hey, we have to write a book. Everybody knew it, right?
I think people knew it when he was running.
But can the same argument be made against Fox?
Oh, of course.
It's when I hear fake news, I automatically go to establishment media versus the new media.
That's kind of more what it's about, right? Where it's like,
I think so.
Established media, they're going to serve their coffers, we are a smaller network. I work personally for a smaller network.
But one day you'll be the establishment media.
Well, that's the thing. Until then, I'm going to call them fake news.
Well, and fake news is the wrong term. Mm-hmm. And the fact that every headline, the Washington Post, mm-hmm. if Donald Trump were to personally cure all forms of cancer, the headline would have something to do with the side effects of whatever was the drug he came up with, right? That would also be not anymore.
Not anymore. You see the Bezos announcement yesterday?
That's right. So not anymore.
The what announcement?
But Jeff Bezos announcement? Washington Post has become a lot more like the Wall Street Journal now with their editorial page.
Yes.
It's definitely word choice. Like, for example, like with the hostages in Israel, right? When they said they died in captivity. No, they were murdered, right?
Right.
So they were brutally murdered by Hamas, but that was conveniently left out because they're trying to serve whoever they're trying.
So it's slanted news, not necessarily fake news.
Yes.
I get a kick out of the fact.
But hold on, back up a second, though. Because some of this comes down to, if you are on Facebook posting what you think about what's happening to your city, country, tax dollars, you can get away with a lot that's not factual. Mm-hmm. But when you're an actual reporter and you're reporting, the rules are a lot tighter. And when you're governed by the FCC, the rules are a lot tighter, right? So if you're broadcasting on the internet, you're not governed by the FCC. Mm-hmm. Everything that I say right here is. So the standard is dramatically different. Now, it might be obvious and it might be logical that somebody who died in captivity was murdered, mm-hmm. but they might not have been murdered. The fact that they were kidnapped, you could say, well, that led to their murder, okay, or led to their death. But murder has a strict definition. Dying in captivity isn't necessarily being murdered mm-hmm. in captivity. There is a difference legally. Mm-hmm. And as a reporter who's governed by the FCC, I have to make sure that I'm using a legal term and not just an assumed. I can't assume an action.
Yeah.
I have to be legally correct about describing that action because I'm governed by the FCC.
So I guess it all depends on semantics, whether or not, we're talking about the news or even, what you said, the definition of conservative. Like earlier, you guys were talking about like the Hope Scholarship. Now, you could be as conservative as you want, but if mm-hmm. you care about public school and you do offer critique, all of a sudden you're like a communist. That doesn't make any sense, right?
True.
We should be able to have a broad conversation.
Absolutely.
It's like when the Israeli-Palestinian thing happened, mm-hmm. right? If you said anything at all critical of Israel, you were anti-Semitic.
Yes.
Is it using fake news just like taking the intellectually lazy way out and calling someone a rhino?
It is.
Okay.
But President's words, not mine.
What I like to what I find entertaining. There's a lot about the Trump administration I'm finding entertaining, both good and bad. But there's something about taking the baseball bat to the crystal shop that I really enjoy watching.
Like the Doge stuff, or like
Doge and the fire hose of information that's coming out.
It's enjoyable unless you run the crystal.
Well,
shop.
exactly. From where I sit, it's entertaining to watch.
Sure.
And one element of this is when the AP was banished from the White House press room.
Yes.
And was that the spot you guys took, or is that?
We actually took in the Pentagon. I believe it was NBC.
Okay.
We took them, but
So now they're claiming a First Amendment violation because freedom of the press. The White House kicked us out of our cushy seat in the press room. That's a First Amendment violation. As if there's one definition for press. If you're not AP or Wall Street Journal,
Right.
or if you're not one of these established, then you're not really press.
Yeah.
And what OAN and frankly Breitbart and bloggers are doing is the definition of the press corps has expanded, and the Trump administration is the first to actually recognize that because, frankly, it got them into office.
It
Yeah.
did. They worked it masterfully.
well, and I think that's like one of the good things, right? Like we could all celebrate. I think diversifying the media space is an absolute wonderful thing. When it comes to like those Doge situations, though, that's when it gets a little dicey because, especially if President Trump, we only have 4 years. If he wants to build a legacy, Elon Musk could get in the way of that when it comes to the midterms.
Well, it's good. But competition is always good, but it's also exhausting because everything's a hot take. Everything has to be extreme. Oh, OMG, you won't believe this reporter got nuked on this interview.
Yeah.
Everything is the most extreme of whatever just to get.
But you guys watch
to
The
feed
Apprentice,
the algorithm.
Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh yeah,
He's
I
a
watched
showman.
it.
it's very much like, Elon right now is
I watched wrestling when I was a kid.
yeah,
too, so-
like he's designated Elon kind of the project manager, right? And it's like when Gary Busey had to build like an art studio, right? Like, and chaos ensued, and he would argue with Meatball. Like that's what we're seeing right now. So
Is that a way to run a country, though?
that
don't
is
think it
exhausting.
is.
It's exhausting.
I don't think that's
It's
the way.
exhausting.
I think it's destabilizing.
I would
Yes.
agree. However, the administration does not have 4 years to make its footprint. It has a
that's
couple
true.
hundred days.
Yeah.
And then you get into the midterm cycle.
What does it matter? If you issue executive orders to do everything you want, what does it matter who controls Congress?
Well, it depends on what part. I think we're talking about different parts of Doge right now. I'm thinking in terms of cleaning house in the various administrative offices, whether it be. Well, I'm not all that happy with what's happening at FBI, but
Yeah.
if you go to some of the other administrative offices where they're cleaning out the roadblocks from his previous administration, who just didn't do what he said told them to do.
They're not just cleaning out roadblocks.
Well, no, and with that, the baby's going out with the bathwater.
They're throwing
right.
the baby out, and
Yes.
they're throwing a nursery full of babies out with the
Right,
bathwater.
yes.
And
Not just one.
Rob, what you said about like the definition of conservative, I think conservatives could be excited about, reining in waste, reining in spending. But I think the key balance here is what Elon is doing. Like Silicon Valley is not applicable to Washington, right? You can't just fire everybody at Twitter. Like it is not the same thing. And I do think, and I would caution President Trump to take a different approach, because when it comes to those midterms or government workers that are living in the Eastern Panhandle, that might be on the chopping block, that may be vital. We could have a complete blowback in 2026. Then the Democrats get the House. Then President Trump really can't move.
Those people
on
live.
things.
Those federal workers live in the suburbs.
And we're building more homes, so we're
And,
gonna get more of them.
And they'll be selling them soon.
That's the swingy areas.
Yeah,
Yeah, when this was first brought up to everybody, it was under the idea of making government more efficient. We shouldn't waste one single tax dollar. I think we can all agree on that, right? And if there are fraudulent contracts, those should be discovered, ended, and the people who engaged in those fraudulent acts should be prosecuted.
absolutely.
Right? If we have a duplication of services, we should identify those duplications, and we should consolidate those services. If we don't need three people doing the same job if one person can do it. I think we can all agree on those things. But that's not really what's happening. That's not what Elon Musk is doing. You had 21 of his Doge bros resign because they said they couldn't continue carrying out these acts that they feel violated the Constitution. They were compromising data, and they had at least one person that they complained about who said, this person's not a data analyst or an engineer, it's an ideologue. Is that who you want going in, looking through your personal information? Because I don't.
Well, I'm also worried.
I didn't vote for someone to get into my personal information.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally worried. My thing is that I would caution. I think we could all agree that Elon Musk is a genius when it comes to technology, space exploration, things like that. I would have much rather had him at NASA. What my worry is for President Trump as well, if we are trying to do business, if we are trying to rein China in, Elon Musk has business with China, with these countries. And now
everybody has business with China.
But I don't want somebody, that's in business with China deciding where to dismantle the federal government. I think I think it's important to make the distinction that Susie Wiles or whoever at the Trump administration said that Elon's technically not an employee of the White House. Like, that's a legal distinction. We also have to keep in mind that Doge is only apparently until 2026, just in time for the midterm. So I think there will be a departure and a shift if Trump wants to have a successful 4 years.
I also think that part of this is to set up a lot of court cases. And I think the courts are going to set up the roadblocks that everybody is concerned about that should be put in place. By then, of course, a lot of people will have been fired and will have found other jobs or not. But I believe in the system. I think the system ultimately works. And what Trump is doing, I don't know if it's a strategic thing or competence or incompetence, but people are really talking about government efficiency in a way that hasn't been discussed before.
Which is a good thing.
It is a good thing.
But if you want people to be efficient, let me give you an idea, right? So these emails that have been going out since January 21st, they came first from an unsecured server, right? Next thing,
was it Hillary?
Which we hit Hillary on.
Which we hit Hillary on strong, right?
Yeah.
Did we though?
The most recent one about give us the 5 things that you did this past. Who's reading those?
It looks like a spam email.
Right.
That was my concern.
That looked like a spam email. There were my wife said about 10 emails that went out, and then it became a battle of report your 5, don't report your 5. Report your 5. Wait, the department head says don't report your 5. The department head says it's voluntary. It's not voluntary. Don't report your 5. And then it varied by each department. So let's say that you're an efficient federal employee who's trying to do their job every day, trying to put in their time, and you're wasting your time reading emails back and forth that are juvenile about report the 5 things. Your supervisor already knows the 5 things you did last week because they're the ones that assigned it to you.
Yeah.
Is Elon Musk really going to read 2.3 million emails about the 5 things that you did last week? And on top of that, the disclaimer on the email says, make sure you don't put anything specific in here so that a foreign actor doesn't get this information. So it's not really a secure email platform we're sending this back to Elon Musk on?
Well, and that's what worries me. We're cutting bureaucracy, but this is another layer of bureaucracy.
We're creating an efficiency by trying to be efficient.
Well,
yeah.
What about the people that say, well, hey, this he's a Johnny come lately to the party, and
Elon,
and he's been given all the power, and the other people that have been fighting a good fight have been pushed to the back.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. It's a balancing act though, because again, being the most rich, the richest man in the world, right, who does have these international connections, I would rather him be in our corner than in Russia's or China's. Sure. But it is a balancing act because I am worried that it's funny, like, especially for Trump, who prides himself on, it is the Trump show. He wants to be the center of attention. But here we are talking about Elon
Musk.
And eventually that's going to get under the man's skin because, and rightfully so, we should be talking about Trump 2.0, not about Elon Musk with the chainsaw. And whatever is happening in Argentina is not applicable here. And that's my concern whenever I see on Facebook, Doge, West Virginia. Bro, we don't have any money. we don't have any money. There's nowhere to cut from. People are poor. People are starving in the southern end of the state. So you can't just take a meat axe to West Virginia because the rest of the country did it already.
Hey, people are wondering why Trump is apparently being more friendly to Russia than most would prefer he was. I think it's a China policy. I think he's trying to align with Russia to send China a message.
Yeah, and I don't actually think, because here's the thing. Putin, only has 5-10 years tops? Right? So
to live, you mean?
Yeah, post Putin, I could understand us Because again, the people of Russia don't want Putin. The people of Russia, I'm sure, do not agree with Putin's policies. Long term, I think it's smart to set up an alliance with Russia as a bulwark against China, because Russia and China should not have gotten together. So long term down the road, not saying we should defend what Putin does, but I do think it's smart for the U.S. to build and at least normalize relations with Russia and the EU. We shouldn't forget about the EU. We shouldn't attack them or anything else. So that way we could have a complete push against China.
Also, I think the bloodshed in Ukraine, that whole thing, just that has to stop one way or the other. I want to, not to shut this down, I want to go back to journalism. Somebody, and unfortunately it was long enough ago, it's not on my feed anymore. Somebody talked about, what about objective journalism? Why can't we have objective journalism anymore? As a journalist, is there such a thing? Because adjectives are adjectives and verbs are verbs.
Sure. Look, I mean, again, my personal opinion, not the opinion of my networks, but I can say that, when I forgot exactly when that fell, where you had to provide both sides.
Fairness policy.
Fairness doctrine, I think, went out under Reagan.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when
Reagan
when that went out the window, I don't think they realized it at the time, because I do think they wanted to maybe give spotlight.
Well, that was before the internet too.
Yeah, and before the internet and everything else. Now it's run rampant, so much so that we live in a world of opinion, not facts.
Well, and I think the objective reporting went out when you started watching Fox all the time, when you started watching MSNBC all the time, and you regarded that as the truth. Therefore, any news story that went against the news story that you just heard was no longer objective reporting.
And
once we siloed news.
And longer news cycles.
Yep.
Added to the...
I think this has been a problem forever. I mean, if you go back to, the late 30s with the buildup of Nazi Germany, I don't know if there were a lot of outlets in the United States that were pro-Nazi per se, but they were certainly all about ignore the problem. It's not our problem.
We could go back further, I guess, with yellow journalism, with the Spanish American War.
It's always been around. There have always been competing newspapers.
Yeah.
Cities always had, I don't know what the titles were then, but there was a conservative paper and a liberal paper. It's always been that way. Washington Post, Washington Star, when I was growing up.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is such a thing as objective journalism anymore. You read the Time magazine versus Newsweek magazine used to be different.
But even social media, everything's an algorithm. So we go to our corners in social media, we go to our corners in news, we go to our corners in sports. This is, I think, because if you boil it down, we're still tribal, we're still cavemen. That's what it comes down to. We need to be with our tribe and club whoever.
Which either way, the internet has exasperated it, and your algorithm theory is incredibly correct. Remember when everybody hated Russian oligarchs?
Yeah.
It's now internet oligarchs, and they control everything that you do. You click on one thing, and then you are peppered with everything else that the algorithm says feeds what you want to read.
And that is my concern, because, look, Bezos, Zuckerberg, Musk, everybody could be playing nice with the Trump administration now. But let's say come 2028, Wes Moore becomes president. They're all going to flock to him. They're all going to be in his pocket. And then my fear is that because we're setting a precedent with executive orders, with these things, that the Democrats are going to be like, oh, I can't wait to have a field day. You're out of the press room. These people back in.
Of course it is.
Well, this is the danger of what's going on in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
So when the next president comes in from a different party, do they fire the 400,000 people in the federal workforce who have been replaced by Trump and put their own 400,000 civilian?
Yeah. But if they triple down on DEI, that's where we are, right? Yeah. It's okay, all the non-binary baristas, you're now going to run the FBI, and this, but it will be our fault. We open the door,
and it's going to get marched through. And this is a fear that a lot of people have: is, are we going to be playing jump rope every time there's a change of administration?
Yeah.
Right? And most federal employees are apolitical. They're in there doing their job. Yeah. They don't care who the president is. They just want to do their job.
I don't think there's an apolitical person on the planet anymore.
When you're doing your job, John?
Oh, well, for how you execute your job.
When you're a mid-level federal employee, you can no longer block what the president wants to do than the guy in the desk or the gal in the desk.
And if they criticize them, they're going to come after soldiers and everything else.
Hey, we're back with more after these.